Welcome to Deep Cuts, the sanctuary for albums that never got their due, the misfits of the discography, the sonic outcasts that dared to be different. I'm your host, the Metal Mistress, slicing through the noise to resurrect the records that slipped through the cracks. This isn't about greatest hits or chart toppers. This is about the albums that confused critics, alienated fans, or simply got buried under the weight of hype. From glam bands going grunge to thrash legends chasing radio play, we're digging up the bold, the bizarre, and the beautifully misunderstood. So grab your headphones and your skepticism, because in this temple of the overlooked, every track is a revelation, and every cut runs deep. There are albums that divide fans, and then there's Saint Anger, a record that detonated like a rusted pipe bomb in Metallica's own legacy. Released in 2003, it wasn't just another entry in their discography. It was a raw, abrasive purge of frustration, addiction, and fractured brotherhood. Gone were the polished solos and arena-ready hooks, replaced instead with clattering snare hits, jagged riffs, and a suffocating sense of claustrophobia. To some, it was the sound of a band imploding. To others, it was the most honest scream Metallica had ever put to tape. This review begins at that crossroads. Is Saint Anger a misunderstood howl of catharsis, or a misstep that left fans clutching their ears? Either way, it's impossible to ignore. In 2004, Metallica released not an album, but a confession. The documentary Some Kind of Monster, directed by Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky, captured the band at its most vulnerable, stripping away the armor of thrash metal legends and exposing the fragile humans beneath. Filmed during the chaotic creation of Saint Anger, the documentary chronicles a group of musicians grappling with addiction, ego, and the existential question of whether Metallica could survive its own success. The film begins in the shadow of bassist Jason Newsted's departure, a fracture that left the band questioning its identity. James Hetfield's struggle with alcoholism and subsequent rehab forced the group into a prolonged hiatus, while Lars Ulrich's outspoken personality clashed with Hetfield's need for control. Into this storm stepped Phil Towle, a performance coach whose presence turned rehearsal rooms into therapy sessions. What might have been a straightforward making-of feature became instead a raw exploration of communication, resentment, and the strange rituals required to keep a band alive. One of the documentary's most striking moments comes with Dave Mustaine's appearance. Once ousted from Metallica and later the driving force behind Megadeth, Mustaine confronts Hetfield and Ulrich about the lingering pain of his dismissal. It is a scene that crystallizes the film's theme. The monsters haunting Metallica are not just riffs and rage, but decades of unresolved wounds. Yet Some Kind of Monster is not merely a chronicle of dysfunction. It is also a story of rebirth. The arrival of bassist Robert Trujillo injects new energy into the band, symbolizing a fresh chapter after years of turmoil. By the film's end, Metallica emerges battered but intact, having survived a crucible that could easily have destroyed them. Ultimately, Some Kind of Monster is more than a documentary about a band. It is a meditation on the cost of creativity and the fragility of human relationships. Few production choices in heavy metal history have sparked as much debate as Lars Ulrich's snare tone on Saint Anger. Released in 2003, the album was already destined to be divisive, but the decision to disengage the snare wires and let the drum ring out with a hollow, metallic clang turned the record into a lightning rod for criticism. What might have been a subtle experiment became the defining sound of the album, a sonic scar that refuses to fade. At its core, the snare tone is abrasive, almost industrial. Each strike reverberates like a steel barrel struck in an empty warehouse, cutting through riffs and vocals with a jarring resonance. For fans accustomed to the tight, thunderous crack of Ulrich's drums on Master of Puppets or the polished punch of the Black Album, this was a shock. Instead of precision, the snare offered chaos. Instead of clarity, it delivered clutter. Many listeners dismissed it as a mistake, a flaw so glaring it overshadowed the music itself. Yet to understand the snare is to understand Saint Anger. The album was born from turmoil, Jason Newsted's departure, James Hetfield's rehab, and the band's near collapse. In that context, the snare becomes more than a poor production choice. It is a symbol of fracture. Its clang is the sound of a band refusing polish, rejecting perfection, and embracing the ugliness of its own state. The drum is not meant to please, it is meant to wound, to remind both the band and the listener that this is not Metallica at their most triumphant, but at their most broken. Critics often mock the tone, comparing it to a trash can lid or a toolbox dropped down a stairwell. But in a mythic sense, the snare is the war drum of collapse. It is the ritual percussion of a band exercising demons, pounding against the walls of its own prison. Every strike is a percussive nail on the chalkboard, constantly drawing your focus to sonic misery. Released in June 2003 as the lead single from Metallica's 8th studio album, Saint Anger is less a conventional song than a raw outburst of emotion. At over 7 minutes, it defies radio-friendly structure, instead channeling rage into a relentless cycle of riffs, chants, and abrasive percussion. Musically, the track is defined by its infamous snare drum tone, a hollow metallic clang that dominates the mix. Combined with the absence of guitar solos, this choice strips away the band's traditional polish, leaving only jagged riffs and pounding repetition. The result is a sound that feels claustrophobic, as though the listener is trapped inside the band's rehearsal space while anger reverberates off the walls. Lyrically, Saint Anger is a confession of burden and release. The refrain, "Saint Anger round my neck," presents anger as a chain, a weight dragging the narrator down. Yet the repeated command to flush it out transforms the song into a ritual of exorcism, purging inner demons through sheer force of sound. James Hetfield's delivery is both aggressive and desperate, reflecting his personal struggles with addiction and recovery during this period. To put it simply, this song is a mess. While there are aspects that had potential, it is simply a failed attempt at a creative vision. Some Kind of Monster is one of Metallica's most unsettling and polarizing songs. At nearly 9 minutes long, it is less a traditional single than a grinding, repetitive incantation, a sonic embodiment of the inner demons the band was wrestling with during this era. Musically, the track is defined by its relentless riffing and abrasive production. The infamous snare drum tone, hollow and metallic, once again dominates the mix, giving the song a clangorous, industrial edge. The absence of guitar solos reinforces the sense of suffocation, leaving listeners trapped in a cycle of pounding rhythms and jagged repetition. Rather than building toward a climax, the song loops and churns, mirroring the inescapable nature of the monster it describes. Lyrically, Some Kind of Monster is a meditation on addiction, rage, and the grotesque thing that grows inside when control is lost. The repeated refrain, "Some kind of monster, some kind of monster," functions like a mantra, hammering home the idea of an internal beast that cannot be silenced. James Hetfield's delivery is raw and strained, reflecting his own battles with alcoholism and the band's collective struggle to survive its fractures. The song's imagery is blunt, almost primitive, but that simplicity underscores its power. The monster is not metaphorical poetry, but a real, gnawing presence.
Been here before, couldn't say I liked it. When do I start writing all this down?
The Unnamed Feeling is one of the album's most haunting and introspective tracks. Where other songs on the record channel rage through blunt repetition, this piece digs deeper into the psychological terrain of fear, panic, and emotional paralysis. It is not simply about anger. It is about the suffocating dread that precedes it, the unnamed sensation that overwhelms before words can capture it. Musically, the song is built around jagged riffs and the abrasive snare tone that defines the Saint Anger era. Yet unlike the relentless pounding of the title track, the Unnamed Feeling shifts between dynamics, moving from tense, restrained passages into explosive bursts of aggression. This ebb and flow mirrors the experience of anxiety itself, the quiet build of unease, followed by sudden eruptions of panic. James Hetfield's vocal delivery oscillates between whispered vulnerability and guttural screams, embodying the instability at the heart of the song. Lyrically, the track confronts the inexpressible. Hetfield describes the sensation as something that takes me away, a force that strips control and leaves him trapped in a cycle of dread. The repetition of phrases underscores the obsessive nature of anxiety, while the refusal to name the feeling reflects its elusive, overwhelming character. In this way, the song becomes a portrait of psychological struggle, capturing the raw immediacy of panic without the comfort of resolution. Reception of the Unnamed Feeling was mixed, much like the rest of Saint Anger. Some listeners praised its emotional depth, seeing it as one of the album's most powerful and relatable tracks. Others criticized its length and abrasive production, arguing that the song's potential was buried beneath the record's controversial sonic choices. Still, it remains a standout moment in Metallica's catalog, notable for its attempt to grapple with vulnerability rather than sheer aggression. Saint Anger remains one of the most polarizing chapters in Metallica's saga. Released in 2003, it was not simply another album, it was a document of collapse, confrontation, and survival. From the infamous snare drum clang to the absence of guitar solos, every choice was a rejection of polish, a deliberate embrace of rawness. The record is abrasive, repetitive, and often uncomfortable, but that discomfort is the point. At its core, Saint Anger is about purging demons. Songs like Saint Anger, Some Kind of Monster, and The Unnamed Feeling hammer home themes of rage, anxiety, and inner turmoil. The lyrics are blunt, the riffs jagged, and the production suffocating. Rather than offering catharsis through triumph, the album traps listeners inside the band's own therapy session, forcing them to confront the same monsters Metallica was battling. Reception was divided. Some hailed its honesty, others dismissed it as a failure. Yet the album won a Grammy, spawned a documentary that exposed the band's fragility, and ultimately marked a turning point. It is not Metallica at their most polished or most powerful, it is Metallica at their most human. In the end, Saint Anger is less a collection of songs than a scar carved into the band's legacy. It is ugly, unforgettable, and essential. Whether loved or hated, it stands as proof that even the gods of metal bleed, and sometimes the sound of that bleeding is the clang of a snare drum echoing through the ruins. In closing, it is an album of great ideas and poor execution, a rare failure from a legendary band.